What is the craziest family secret you have? Story 1. Back in the 1920s or so, my great-great-grandfather had a bit of money to spare and decided to buy some oil stock. Not a lot, but some. He happened to pick one that survived the crash and the Great Depression, and came out on the other side of World War II with quite a lot of money for the time. In the 1980s, after he passed away, that money was placed in a trust to pay for college for all the kids of my generation. For some reason, I guess these sorts of trusts need to have some kind of end date or a trigger to dissolve them so they don't just continue indefinitely. Since I was the youngest person of my generation born when it was established, they decided I would be the trigger. So, when I die, my siblings and cousins will inherit about $500,000 each. Under no circumstances could I ever get access to that money, although I did end up using a few thousand for college, but since I had a job and a 90% full-ride scholarship, it was really just a small amount. I just have it hanging over my head as a reason for my family to hope for my death. Or worse. It's a little unnerving when I think about it, so I try not to. Story 2. My grandfather was involved in illegal activity in the late 1940s and early 1950s. My mom finally admitted to me last year not only that he did it, but that he would make the whole family go with him. He frequented truck stops for business and to meet women. Yes, while his kids were in the car. When he was 37, he had a massive stroke on the back steps of his house. His suitcase was packed, and he was leaving his wife and 5 kids to go live with someone else. Instead, my grandmother got stuck caring for a man who had walked out on her. She tried to divorce him, but she would have had to cover his care. Her job at a nursing home didn't pay well enough for that, so he stayed. After a while, he regained mobility. Unfortunately, that meant he could harm others again. My first memory ever is of him doing something highly inappropriate. Everything came out after my grandmother died in 2008. He passed away in 1996. My grandmother admitted not long before she died that she knew what had been happening. To me, that just meant she was part of the problem too. Story 3. One of my great-uncles was probably involved in classified work of some kind. He was a pretty intense guy, smart, had an outstanding record in World War II, but my parents were always suspicious about his job. Supposedly, he worked for the U.S. Geological Survey, but he traveled a lot for someone who worked for the Department of the Interior. I'm not sure of all the other reasons they were suspicious, but my dad was a detective, so I figure he had good instincts. Turns out their suspicions might have been correct. After my uncle passed away, they went through his house and found that his passport had no stamps, despite him frequently being overseas. He had hidden compartments in his home, including some for weapons, and he didn't seem like the paranoid type. There were some other strange things too, though I can't remember all of them now. I have no idea what his actual job was, and I don't think we'll ever know. Still, he was a fascinating guy, and everyone misses him. Story 4. My great-grandfather may have taken justice into his own hands. I might have posted this somewhere else before, so calling it a secret is a bit of a stretch. The story goes that my grandma's sister, who was 5 at the time, went missing from the front step of the house and was later found to have been harmed by a neighbor. When he was identified by witnesses, he was imprisoned in London, we're from further north, for around 6 or 7 years. It's not clearly remembered. My grandmother and the rest of the family who explained it are now gone, whether the girl died shortly after or years later. But she did pass away as a result of what happened. After the man was released and placed in a halfway house, he disappeared and was found in the Thames 2 weeks later. He was deceased and apparently showed signs of restraint and injuries. My great-grandfather, who never missed a day of work, had been absent for exactly those 2 weeks. The police came and asked if he had missed work, and when he said yes, that was the end of it. This was back in the 1920s. I've looked around online but haven't found much. Many old records were lost during World War II. Story 5. When I was 10 years old, my family, 3 sisters, mother and stepfather and I, lived with another family, a single mother and her 3 young sons, in a run-down apartment above a gas station in rural Maine. My mom has never been what most would call emotionally stable, and she often positioned herself as a victim in any situation just for the attention. One of the 3 boys was a special needs child, and he was very difficult to manage. While the rest of us went to school or work, my mom would stay home and care for the special needs child, who was around 3 or 4 years old. One day I came home from school and saw several ambulances and police officers in front of the gas station. At first, I didn't think much of it because of the area we lived in, until I saw my mom surrounded by 4 officers. I was told to go stay at a friend's house for the night, and I did. Later, I found out that the boy had passed away while in my mother's care. The official cause of death was ruled as SIDS, but for a time, there was suspicion that my mother may have smothered him. This was in the 1980s, and investigative methods weren't as advanced. Still, deep down, I believe she was responsible. Story 6. My brother got involved with a guy through his friends who had access to Palm Pilots that had fallen off the back of a truck during their peak popularity. For a couple of years, my brother and 2 of his friends would sell them and make a lot of money. That explains where a lot of my nicer things came from when I was a kid. My brother would randomly show up to my house with new hockey jerseys, game tickets, a new TV, and he usually showed up in a different car every few months. My parents knew what was going on, but I was too young to understand it at the time. 2 years ago, my brother and I were drinking, and he finally told me everything about that period in the early 2000s. Apparently, over those few years, he made more than $500,000 from selling the stolen merchandise. Story 7. This isn't exactly a secret, but we're not supposed to talk about it. My cousin Becca, age 10, told her school counselor that her brother, Donald, age 17, had harmed her in a serious way. Police came and interrogated my cousin Donald for 10 hours without telling him what he was being accused of, eventually coercing a disorganized confession from him. During the trial, Becca admitted she had made the whole thing up. There was talk about doing a medical exam to clarify things, but it was ultimately rejected. Now, my cousin Donald is registered as an offender in New York. A year later, my grandmother and aunt, Becca's mom, were running a daycare from their home, one of the best in the city. One day, while preparing snacks for the children, my grandma left her computer unattended. Becca got on the computer and opened inappropriate websites. The next day, she told her counselor that Grandma watched such content while caring for kids. As a result, my grandmother and aunt lost both their business and their home. Story 8. On my grandfather's deathbed, our family found out that he had a daughter younger than me. That makes me older than my own aunt. Around the same time, my cousin, around 19 or 20 years old, was engaged until she visited her older sister, around 28, and her niece in our family's country of origin. While there, she had an affair with her sister's child's father. The wedding didn't happen, not only because of that, but also due to the man's history of anger issues. He eventually worked on those issues and reconciled with my older cousin, but the affair created chaos within the extended family. Her parents made her confess everything to her fiancé, and the wedding was called off. She was grounded for 2 years, literally not allowed to leave the house, and was even pulled out of college for what her family considered a betrayal. My mom once had a secret abortion that only I know about. My ex had an abortion with me that my family doesn't know about. We're still on friendly terms, even though she's now pregnant again by the person she dated after me. My uncle, who is generally considered a good guy, had a secret child with a woman he met while he and my aunt were separated. And my older brother lost his virginity to our younger cousin when she came to visit from overseas. Ironically, we had introduced her to one of my friends who had a major crush on her. She hasn't had a relationship since. Story 9. This might seem pretty mild compared to all the dark stories here, but here it is. When my dad was in college in the 1970s, my grandfather went up to Alaska to work on building the pipeline. It was good money, and he sent most of it back home to my grandmother to cover the bills and college tuition for the kids. When my grandpa came home, he discovered that she had gambled all the money away, playing bingo. He divorced her, and my dad had to drop out of college and join the military. About 10 years later, they reconciled and got remarried. This story wasn't exactly a secret, more like a piece of family lore. But when my grandmother was on her deathbed, it came out that during those 10 years, she had married another man, spent all his money, and returned to my grandfather when she had no one else left to support her. Bingo can be a cruel addiction. Story 10. My dad's side of the family includes 4 brothers, including my dad, and 1 sister. Everyone except my dad has been involved in criminal activity to some degree. I'm not supposed to know about any of it, but my aunt is banned from entering the United States and can't even board a plane that flies over U.S. airspace. Every time we stop at the border, our last name triggers something in their system, and they have to search our car. My uncle, whom I met after he served 20 years in a maximum security prison in British Columbia, is back in jail again, this time for a double homicide. He had an argument with 2 older men in a parking lot, and things escalated badly. I have plenty more stories like that. Let's just say Thanksgiving dinner is intense. Edit. I was asked to share more. For context, my grandfather is a heavy-set, balding man with a kind heart and a sharp goatee. He never raises his voice at us, and if we had a problem, he'd always try to fix it. A few summers ago, he asked me to clean out his attic. While I was up there, I found old photos of him as a biker. I'd never seen pictures of him when he was young, but there he was. Black slicked hair, leather jacket, the full look. I recognized him because a bit of his eagle tattoo was visible under his rolled-up sleeve. I asked him who the others in the photo were, and he gave me a look I'd never seen before. Then he grabbed the photo and said he didn't want to talk about it. He also has a huge scar that runs across his entire back. Not sure if the two are connected. Story 11. I'm kind of relieved this might get buried. I created a throwaway account for this because I think my brother uses Reddit too. My family is all over the place. I'm the youngest of 4, and our views range from political extremes to religious polarities. Not long after my brother's wedding, my wife, who isn't great at keeping secrets, came to me with some news. During the bachelorette party, my new sister-in-law got drunk and revealed that my brother is a cross-dresser. He paints his nails, wears makeup, and sometimes goes out in public dressed in women's clothes. If my super-religious sisters ever found out, it would be chaos. My mom would probably cut ties, and my dad would mock him. I'm the only one he could tell, but he's so ashamed he won't even talk to me about it. Honestly, I just feel bad for him. I wish he knew he can be himself and not worry about what anyone thinks. He'll probably never tell the family, or even me. Thankfully, he married someone who truly loves him, aside from the part where she got a little too drunk and spilled the secret. My wife said that no matter what path he takes, his partner will stay by his side because they're best friends and they love each other. At least he has that. If you're reading this, bro, I love you. Be who you are, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Story 12. My family is a bit of a disaster, so please don't judge me for what they've done. When I was in college, I lived at home to save money. My girlfriend at the time, let's call her Sally, got kicked out of her house by her difficult parents. Surprisingly, my parents let her stay in our spare room to help her out. About 6 months into that arrangement, I found out my parents were getting divorced. The reason? My dad had cheated on my mom with Sally. Yes, my girlfriend. There's even speculation that there was some overlap. Obviously, I moved out and cut off contact with my dad. You'd think that was the worst part, but it got worse. 6 months later, I received a wedding invitation from my dad and Sally. She's over 30 years younger than him, and he's nearly 60. I didn't go to the wedding, of course, but the story doesn't end there. Last week, I found out she's pregnant. That means my daughter is going to have an aunt or uncle who's 30 years younger than me and just 4 years older than her. Welcome to my personal nightmare. Story 13. My sister has been arrested several times for making illegal substances, starting around the age of 20. She's always been the wild card in the family. We try to keep her out of conversations, but sometimes I can't help sharing the ridiculous story about her most recent arrest. She went to pick up her kids from her ex and had to put their toys in the trunk of her car. After loading them in and hitting the road, she made it a few miles onto the highway before hearing sirens. She looked in the rearview mirror and realized her trunk was wide open, and all her equipment was inside, clearly visible. That was it. She still has over 15 years left on her sentence. Her kids live with their dad now, and they're doing okay. I joke about it sometimes, but honestly, it breaks my heart. I just hope that when I leave for college, I won't end up making the same mistakes she did. Story 14. Using a throwaway for this, because it's a pretty serious and overwhelming secret. My brother has been transporting illegal substances on internal European flights for the past 5 years. It started during his flight training in Spain. On his first long-distance flight, the instructor asked if he wanted to earn some extra cash. My brother agreed. The flight path took them near the border between Africa and Spain. Since they were flying a light aircraft without official tracking, they made a detour to a small airfield in Africa, landed, and picked up a large quantity of narcotics. They shared part of the product with the local air traffic control in exchange for silence and flew back into Spanish airspace. Their next stop was another small airfield, where they unloaded the shipment. It turned out to be extremely profitable, and this process continued about once a week. Fast forward to today. He's flying for a major airline and still involved in transporting all kinds of illicit goods. He doesn't handle the substances directly. He just gets notified when a shipment is on board and is compensated per flight. They use certain strategies to avoid searches, like declaring mechanical issues or requesting expedited gates, which ensures they aren't stopped. Everyone involved gets a cut, and no one speaks up. At first, I thought he might have been exaggerating, but after meeting a few of his fellow pilots, some with the same airline, others with different European or international carriers, I realized it's not just him. One international pilot said he used to do it but stopped due to the higher risk flying to countries like the US. Others still do it because the risk in Europe is relatively low and the payout is high. If caught, the plan is to play dumb and act like it was an unknown cargo. This has really taken a toll on me. I want to tell my parents, but I know it would break my mother. She's finally in a good place mentally, and this would ruin her. It sounds unbelievable, but it's real, and it's weighing heavily on me. A friend of mine even got excited when he found out, saying he could now get cheap substances. That was deeply upsetting. It's not just about minor stuff. The fact that harder drugs are being moved around is what's keeping me up at night. This is a massive secret, and it's completely changed how I see the world. Story 15. When I was 7 years old, my dad took me away from my mom in the middle of the night. He brought me to a small town in Utah, where he kept me for 2 years. For most of that time, I was locked in a dark room. I was barely fed, often given scraps, and I was constantly physically abused, resulting in several cracked and broken ribs. During the summer, he tied me to a post by the neck and left me in the sun for 3 days straight. The only water I got was a quick spray from a hose once a day. When I was brought back inside, it was only to be locked up again. After about a year, I was allowed to hear my mom's voice again, but only as she listened on the phone while I was being harmed. At 8 years old, I was forced to inhale substances, and it was the first time I was exposed to drugs. It was also when I experienced something that no child ever should. There was constant abuse, physical, emotional, and worse. Eventually, I became numb to everything, my pain tolerance increased, and I began to slowly wither away. After 2 years, I was reunited with my mother at a truck stop. What my dad didn't know was that the place was under surveillance. A SWAT team raided the building and took him into custody. I was finally rescued. My mother had gone through so much to get me back, and I'm just grateful I didn't give up. I wrote a detailed paper about this experience, but I've never released it publicly. Only a few people have read it. I'm 18 now, and it's taken me a long time to process it all. I still remember almost everything. Story 16. I wish this wouldn't get lost in the crowd, but here it is anyway. Many years ago, when I was 23, I married a widow who was incredibly kind and beautiful. She had a grown daughter with striking red hair. My father met her, fell in love, and eventually married her. That made my dad my son-in-law, and it changed everything. My stepdaughter was now my stepmother, because she had married my father. It didn't stop there. Eventually, I had a son. That little boy became my dad's brother-in-law, and, technically, my uncle. Since he was also the son of my stepmother, he became her brother too. Then my father and his wife had a son. That child became my grandchild, since he was the son of my stepdaughter, which means my wife was now the mother of my stepmother, making her my grandmother too. If my wife was now my grandmother, that meant I had become my own grandchild. And that's how I ended up in the strangest situation of all. I became my own grandfather. It sounds like a joke, and it's hard to wrap your head around, but every step checks out. I'm my own grandpa. Story 17. My mom found out she was adopted at her father's funeral when she was 6 years old. She still has no idea who her birth parents are. She experienced her first major mental health crisis in her 20s. After using drugs at the time, she had a severe episode and jumped out of a window, believing my grandmother was trying to harm her. She broke her spine in the fall. Despite not having health insurance, a generous surgeon at the hospital performed the spinal fusion surgery for free. Fast forward 25 years later, she had 4 children and experienced another psychotic episode. One Wednesday, while we were all at school, she saw something on TV that convinced her the world was ending. She lit a pile of laundry on fire as a signal and waited to be rescued. My grandmother arrived, saw the scene, and screamed in fear, which startled my mom again. She ran through the fire toward a religious painting on the wall and sustained third-degree burns. There were other hospitalizations and episodes in between, but those were the most significant ones. I've never really shared this before. Despite her condition, which went misdiagnosed and untreated for years, my mother is a loving, selfless, intelligent, funny, and extraordinary person who does everything for her children. It's difficult when people ask what happened to her, because the story is so much. But once you get to know her, you realize she's a survivor, and it's truly inspiring. Story 18. My uncle had a daughter when he was around 18 years old, back in the 1970s. The mother took the child and disappeared, so he never saw her again until many years later when she found him following her grandfather's death. She was in her late 20s at the time. She told my uncle that the father of her child was abusive, so my uncle drove from Oregon to Southern California to help her pack and move in with him. About 6 months later, my uncle and his wife began having marital issues and eventually divorced. It later came to light that my uncle had entered into an inappropriate relationship with the woman he believed might not be his daughter. He claimed he had a DNA test proving they weren't biologically related. However, my aunt quietly arranged another test, which confirmed that the young woman was, in fact, his biological daughter. Even now, a decade later, he continues to deny the truth, and they maintain their relationship. The rest of our family has cut ties with him. Story 19. There was a time in my life when at least one family member tried to harm me, in order to keep hidden the physical and emotional abuse I endured as a child. The trauma affected me so deeply that I lost a sense of who I was. I moved far away and tried to live a quiet life. Unfortunately, he eventually tracked me down. Instead of targeting me again, my girlfriend, who had nothing to do with any of it, became the victim and was tragically killed. I spent a long time trying to piece everything together, which was difficult because I struggle with memory issues. Thankfully, another family member believed me and helped me uncover the truth. When I finally confronted the person responsible, I chose not to resort to violence. Instead, I forced him to confess everything he had done. The last I heard, he took his own life before any legal action could be taken. My life has felt like a thriller ever since. Story 20. This may sound unbelievable, and to be honest, I couldn't believe it either when I first heard it. I come from a culture where male children are highly valued, and a woman is often only truly accepted after giving birth to a son. As a result, families sometimes keep having children until a boy is born. My aunt had 2 daughters already, and I only ever knew about the eldest. The second daughter had been given up for adoption to a distant relative in another region, and while it wasn't really a secret, it wasn't discussed much. During her 3rd pregnancy, the family hoped for a son. However, she gave birth to another girl. Still, I only have 1 known girl cousin and 1 boy cousin from that side of the family, and no mention of a 4th pregnancy. What I was later told is this. Before my uncle could meet his newborn child, some members of the family arranged a plan. They found a poor farming couple who had delivered a baby boy at the same hospital on the same day, and paid them to exchange babies. I don't know how they pulled it off, or why the hospital didn't stop it. But in the region we come from, money can go a long way. And back then, people got away with things like this more easily. To this day, I don't know who else knows this. My uncle and the 2 cousins, his biological daughter and the child raised as his son, seem completely unaware. I only found out through my mom. It's a heavy family secret, and it's not something that will likely ever be spoken of publicly. Story 21. My friend's mom, we'll call her Mary, has some dark secrets in her past. Literally. One day, when Mary was a kid, she came home from school and went to hang up her coat in the closet. Inside was something that no child should ever see. A lifeless body. Her mother quickly closed the door and acted like nothing had happened. Years later, after extensive therapy, Mary was able to piece the story together. Apparently, Mary's father had been having an affair with another married woman. Mary's mother suspected something, and one day, the other woman unexpectedly came to the house. The reasons are unclear, maybe a misunderstanding or a message passed through the wrong person. Either way, it led to an altercation, and Mary's mother ended up stabbing the woman. Not knowing what to do, she hid the body in the closet. When Mary's father got home from work, her mother confessed what had happened. But things didn't end there. A few hours later, the woman's husband showed up, likely suspecting that she had gone to meet Mary's dad. A confrontation broke out, and Mary's father killed him in the struggle. So both of Mary's parents ended up taking lives that day. They buried the bodies in the backyard. At some point, the police considered them suspects and even dug up the yard, but found nothing. Mary believes the bodies were moved at some point. Her parents always denied any involvement and took their secrets with them when they passed away about 15 to 20 years ago. The missing persons cases were widely covered in the media at the time. This really did happen. Story 22. There has always been something deeply unsettling about Uncle E. He was deprived of oxygen at birth, which led to significant cognitive and developmental challenges. As a child, he harmed his younger brother, Uncle V, and later, as an adult, he committed another serious offense. He joined the military and left the country shortly after, which many believe was an attempt to escape consequences. There are old wedding photos of him with a woman no one ever talks about. To this day, no one knows who she was or how their marriage came to be. My grandmother also endured unimaginable trauma in her childhood, which she only revealed while she was dying. When my mother was seeking justice for what Uncle V had done to me, my grandmother begged her not to press charges, saying that if she could stay silent all her life, so could my mom. She openly favored Uncle V and had a strained relationship with her daughters. We suspect that Uncle V may have harmed others as well, but no one else has spoken up. His children dislike me for being the reason he was held accountable. Separately, my husband has a child from a previous relationship in Germany. Due to family conflict, he hasn't been able to see his child more than twice. We still pay child support, and our own children don't know about their older sibling yet. We plan to tell them when they're older and can understand. Story 23. I know this will likely get buried, but I just learned something that completely shook my world. Back in 1972, before she met my dad or had me, my mother had an affair with a married man and became pregnant. She chose to give the baby up for adoption. A few days after the birth, the baby was handed over to his adoptive parents and never seen again, until recently. The reason my mom told me now, I'm 33, is because her biological son had been searching for her for 20 years and finally found her through social media. I grew up believing I was an only child and never suspected anything, so this revelation has really rocked my foundation. Part of me wishes she had told me sooner, but the other part is just trying to process that I now have an older brother. I haven't spoken to him yet. My mom wants me to take it slow and hasn't told the rest of the family yet. She's asked me to keep it private for now, though I've shared it with a few close friends, and now with you all. It might not seem as dramatic as some other stories, but for me, it's been life-changing. Story 24. This might get buried, but here it goes. My grandmother's sister was married to a man who was abusive. He was violent and nearly killed her. But in the small town they lived in, divorce brought shame and gossip, and could even lead to social isolation. So, my great-grandfather and my grandmother's brother took him hunting and never brought him back. They claimed it was a tragic hunting accident, and my grandmother's sister became a widow. No one ever questioned it. She was safe, and the community accepted her again. There's more. My grandfather used to run moonshine during his time in the Navy. He made great money for a few years. He modified his car to have 2 gas tanks and hid the liquor in one, wearing his naval uniform to avoid suspicion. It worked well until the one time it didn't. He was chased by the police, rolled the car, got out, and ran. He was never caught. He was a wild spirit and never liked authority figures, especially preachers. Interestingly, my grandmother married a preacher when she was just 15. That man had multiple wives in different towns, which probably explains why my grandfather never trusted religious leaders again. Everyone involved has since passed away. Story 25. 2 of my aunts were allegedly harmed by 2 of my uncles and my now deceased great-uncle during their childhood. It's said that my grandparents knew and did nothing to stop it. Now, one of those aunts is 37 and has struggled with substance abuse since she was a teenager. She has told her daughter, who is still very young, disturbing things about her past. She often blames the relatives involved and our grandparents for everything that went wrong in her life, saying that none of this would have happened if not for what she experienced. She also reportedly uses that history to manipulate our grandparents into giving her money. The other aunt has had a long pattern of unhealthy relationships and mostly blames the first aunt for how things turned out. Their dynamic has been chaotic for years. I don't know if anything happened to my mom, but she once told me, while under the influence, that she and her brother had a relationship when they were in their 20s. I don't know the full story, and honestly, I don't want to. Our family has a lot of dysfunction, and this is only a glimpse of it. There are definitely more buried secrets, but this one alone speaks volumes. Story 26. This story is difficult to tell. Not because of how many people don't know it, but because of the one person who still doesn't. Or at least, I hope she doesn't. Let me start from the beginning. I was 9 years old when my mom had just finished her battle with breast cancer. She had lost a lot of weight and was trying to rebuild her life. My biological father wasn't really around, so when a new man came into her life, it seemed like a fresh start. But looking back now, I realized that he had found us. He was looking for someone vulnerable, a household with pain and hardship. He needed that dynamic to feed the control he craved. They married, bought a house, and everything changed. Over time, he created division between me and my mom, turning us against each other. He blamed it on me becoming a teenager. He would provoke me to the point of breakdown, just to make me look like the problem. He made sure I felt completely isolated, ashamed, and afraid to tell anyone what was happening. Eventually, I began to accept the abuse as a permanent part of my life. I thought that if I stayed quiet, maybe it would hold my family together. I believed that if I told someone, everything would fall apart. I lived in silence, afraid to even hope for normalcy. At the same time my mother became pregnant with his child, he started to abuse me. Later, in high school, I finally made friends, people I trusted enough to open up to. What I didn't know was that those friends contacted authorities on my behalf. When I was called in for questioning, I denied everything. I defended him, lied, and tried to make it all disappear. But then the officers told me they already knew everything, down to the last detail, because my friends had told them. That's when I realized it was finally over. It couldn't go back to the way it was, but it also felt like something new was just beginning. My life. That same night, detectives came to our home at around 2 a.m. My mother was holding my 2-year-old sister. They questioned her and discovered she had no idea what had been going on. She was devastated. But we were both finally free to start over. The hardest moment was handing over evidence to the authorities, seeing the look on my mom's face when I gave them things her husband had used to hurt me. She had no idea. None of us did. Now, years later, most of my family knows what happened. His face was even on the news. But the person I worry about most is my little sister. She was very young at the time and only has faint memories of him. When she used to see fire trucks go by, she'd ask, "Daddy? Where's Daddy?" Because he had once been a firefighter. He will be out of prison soon. She'll be about 12 when that happens. I know this secret won't stay hidden forever. I don't know when she'll learn the truth, or how she'll process it, but I do know I'll never let him near her. Ever. I've told myself for years that I stayed silent as a way of protecting her, even if that wasn't healthy. He would hurt me while she was in the house. Sometimes, while she was in her crib for hours, with no idea what was happening. I don't know what she might remember, if anything. But I hope that when she does learn the truth, she'll understand that I was just a child too, and that none of this was ever our fault. Story 27. When I was around 8 years old, my parents had already been divorced for a while, and my mom was going through a tough time emotionally. One day, my sister and I came home from school. She was about 14, I think, though I don't remember exactly. Everything was quiet when we got in. We went to my mom's room, but the door was locked. We knocked several times, but there was no response. My sister began to panic because she knew our mom had been struggling with depression. I didn't really understand what was going on at the time, but I could tell something was wrong. She started yelling and trying to force the door open, twisting the knob any way she could, until it finally gave way. I will never forget what I saw when that door opened. My mom was lying on the floor, unconscious, surrounded by pills of every color scattered all around her. I didn't understand the full situation, but I knew something wasn't right. My sister screamed and tried to wake her up, which terrified me and made me start crying. She called our grandmother, who then called the authorities and rushed to our house. After my grandmother arrived, they took me away from the scene. My older brother, who was about 19 at the time, took me out for ice cream. I don't remember much else about that part, just sitting there while he kept telling me that Mom was going to be okay. She was taken to the hospital and had her stomach pumped. Thankfully, she survived. I remember visiting her in the hospital. She cried the entire time and kept saying she was sorry. I didn't understand why she was crying back then, but I remember crying too just from seeing her so upset. A couple of years later, she was admitted to a treatment facility after another mental health crisis. Even with all that, she has always been an incredible mother. She gave us everything she could, even through her struggles. I owe so much of who I am to her. We never told anyone about what happened, not even some of our extended family. But that's one of the deeper secrets in our family's past. Story 28. This might not sound too wild, but the very existence of my family is, in a way, a family secret. My paternal grandfather left my dad, his sister, and their mom, and went on to start a completely new family. He passed away about 1.5 years ago, and there was no mention of us in his obituary. We only found out about his death because my dad's mother passed away around the same time, and some relatives mentioned my grandfather's passing during that time. Later, when my sister tried to leave a message in the online memorial guest book, it was either deleted or never approved. It was strange and a little surreal reading all the other entries. So many people wrote about what an amazing father and grandfather he was. Oddly enough, I don't really hold any resentment toward him now. I barely knew him. What I do know is that he was a sergeant in World War II and fought on one of the beaches on D-Day. People go through difficult periods in their lives, and I can only imagine the emotional toll something like that might have taken on him. If PTSD was involved, it might explain some of the decisions he made. I've come to believe that in the end, he may have been a good man. He just made choices that kept part of his life hidden, and we were part of that hidden story. Story 29. This is a difficult story to share, but I hope someone out there sees it. My mother passed away when I was 10 years old. My grandmother didn't tell anyone right away, and immediately cleared the house of everything personal. Soon after, she presented a will that named her as the sole inheritor. I only asked for a few small, sentimental things, as any child might, but she didn't send what she had promised. The next time I called her, she told me she didn't have a granddaughter by my name. She had my mom cremated quickly and scattered the ashes at sea. I believe she forged the will. My mother had 2 daughters, and creating a will at all would have been very out of character for her. My older half-sister had left to live with her father in the 1970s, after our mother didn't believe her about something serious. Later, my mom lost custody of me in the 1980s, and her visits became shorter over time, eventually limited to just 4 weekends a year. She often complained about my father not sending enough support. But when she died, she owned 2 rental properties, with no job. A tenant was involved in her death, but claimed self-defense and was not charged. She was only 40 years old. As an adult, I found out that she had manipulated my father into paying over $1,000, plus covering all expenses for each of those rare visits. Now that I have a son who's 6, I often think about what I saw and experienced by that age. I don't know how or when to explain all of this to him. He knows I had a different mother than his current grandmother. He's got his own challenges. He's very curious and full of energy. And I'm not sure how he'll react when he starts asking deeper questions. But I know they'll come. Story 30. 13 years ago, my mom and I were out shopping. I was only 7, so I don't remember the store, but I suddenly had to use the restroom. My mom took me to the bathrooms, and I went in on my own. Unfortunately, I forgot to lock the door. A man walked in, smiling in a strange way, and a moment later, my mom burst in after him. She hit him in the head with something heavy. I still don't know what it was. Maybe it was something from the food counter, like a sugar shaker. Whatever it was, it hit him hard. He collapsed, hit his head on the toilet, and there was a lot of blood. Way more than I expected. Everything happened so fast. The store staff rushed over, and then the police were called. When they arrived, it turned out the man had wandered away from a care center next door. He was cognitively impaired, and his caregiver was outside the store in complete panic. Paramedics showed up, but sadly, the man didn't make it to the hospital. The police were on the scene for hours. I remember sitting on the curb, watching cars go by, just waiting for everything to settle. Eventually, my mom was arrested and charged with negligent manslaughter. She was sentenced to 12 years in prison, and I was placed in foster care. 8 months later, one of the caretakers from the group home, Sister Mary Edwards, told me I was going to visit my mom. I had never seen her since the incident, so I was confused. We went to the women's prison, and she was in the medical unit. That's when I learned she had been stabbed in an altercation. They let us speak privately. She was barely able to talk, but pulled me close and whispered 2 things I'll never forget. First, she said, "I was paid to hurt that man. It wasn't supposed to happen like this." And second, she said, "I love telling wild stories that never happened." And that was it. I walked out of that prison a different person. That experience helped shape who I am today. I'm now a criminal defense lawyer, and I often think of that day and everything it taught me. Story 31. This story might get buried, but here it is anyway. The only reason my immediate family has no ties to Nazi Germany is because of a surprising twist of fate, and some unexpected rebellion. My great-grandmother was deeply in love with a man who seemed perfect. He was wealthy, educated, charismatic, and genuinely cared for her. He wanted to marry her and formally asked her parents for her hand. But they had one condition. She couldn't get married until her older sister did. So, in a bizarre turn, they arranged for this amazing man to marry her older sister instead. Heartbroken and defiant, my great-grandmother left her family behind. She married an uneducated police officer from Frankfurt, someone far below what her family expected. She cut ties with her 10 siblings and her parents, choosing instead to make her own way. Things were rocky between the two of them, and this all happened as Germany was descending into chaos under Hitler. She wanted to leave for America and asked her husband to come. He refused. So while he was at work one day, she sold everything in their home, except for one chair, which we still have, and on that chair she left 4 tickets to America. She moved to the U.S. and rebuilt her life. Since her husband refused to learn English, he worked as a janitor. She, on the other hand, became a landlord, buying properties and even running a booking agency for dancers. At one point, she ran a local entertainment and bar venue. No one in my family today knows this story, but I learned all of it when I brought my grandmother back to Germany for a visit. A few beers in, and out came the stories. Everyone else might think our family's background is ordinary, but there's a whole other side they don't know. Story 32. I'm not sure if this qualifies, but It's something I've never shared before. My dad's best friend, who was like a second father to me, served in the 22nd Regiment for nearly a decade. As a kid, I thought it was amazing having this tough, heroic figure in my life who had been in the military. I remember being around 14 or 15 years old, shooting an air rifle in the backyard with him. He could hit a cigarette from 70 meters away, trimming it shorter and shorter with each shot. That's when I finally asked him directly what he had done in the Army. He didn't hesitate. He told me straight up, and followed it with some stories that, to this day, I hope I never experience anything close to. I also had a friend named Jude, who I met about 15 years ago when I was a teenager. He worked as a local park keeper. What I didn't know at first was that Jude had been a child soldier in Africa and was brought to the UK through a charitable organization. It was only after becoming close friends that he told me his story. At the time, I wasn't sure whether to believe either of them. I wasn't very socially experienced and knew I could be easily misled. But eventually, I realized that they had both told me essentially the same story. It turns out my dad's friend and Jude had been in the same region during the same period. Neither of them knows about the other. To this day, I've never told either one. But there's a real chance that, without knowing it, they might have encountered each other in a way no one would ever want to imagine. Story 33. It's not exactly a secret anymore, but I still think it's a pretty heavy story. When I was 9, I was adopted into a new family. I gained a new brother, who was 15 at the time, and a sister, who was 17. We finalized the paperwork when I was 10. That first Christmas was awful. No one spoke much, and everything felt tense and forced. I didn't understand what was happening, and assumed it was somehow my fault. My new dad was constantly working, and I didn't have much of a relationship with him. Then my new mom started reading a book with me about understanding and accepting different sexual orientations. It was about what it means to be gay and why it's okay. At the time, I thought it was just a learning moment. Later, I found a printed email from my mom to my grandmother where she said things had been difficult, but she hoped there would be a silver lining soon. Eventually, after months of strange tension, my new parents sat me down and told me the truth. My dad was gay. I found out later that he had known before I was even adopted, but no one told me. My siblings had found out before Christmas, which explained why that holiday had been so uncomfortable. That was 13 years ago. Since then, I've come to love all of my parents, including both of my stepdads. It was a rough transition, but in the end, I have a family that loves me. And that's what matters. Story 34. My mom told me this story during a conversation about religion. Apparently, our family used to be Catholic, until my great-great-grandfather uncovered something that made him, and ultimately our whole family, walk away from the church. As the story goes, my great-great-grandfather was a young boy helping out at a small mission in the Philippines. He held a position similar to a deacon or assistant. The church had a large statue of the Virgin Mary, which was hollow and rested on a false bottom. Whenever the church wanted to raise money, they would have my great-great-grandfather climb inside the statue and pour water down the inside of the face. This created the illusion that the Virgin Mary was crying. The priest would then tell the congregation that she was weeping because the community wasn't donating enough, or that more money was needed for some noble cause. Eventually, my family discovered the truth behind the miracle and felt completely disillusioned. After that, they denounced their affiliation with the church, and none of us have been back since. Story 35. There's a long-standing tradition in my family of alcoholism, estranged relatives, and unacknowledged children. If you upset the wrong person, you're essentially erased from family history. For example, I have a half-sister. My dad had a brief encounter with her mother in a public restroom and, well, here we are. He completely denies her existence. I also have an aunt I've never met because she angered the wrong family member. and now no one acknowledges her at all. There's also a cousin whose name you don't even say. Mentioning him is basically social exile. Back to my half-sister. My dad actually met her, her husband, and his only biological grandchildren at my brother's funeral, without realizing who they were. He even liked them. I've tried hard over the years to get him to accept her, but the topic has become so taboo it feels pointless now. She's doing well, he's content, and life just goes on. There's also a rumor of another half-brother living in southeastern England, and possibly another sister in France. My dad really got around. My paternal grandfather was an Irish immigrant with a terrible temper and a drinking problem. He physically abused my dad, my uncle, and my grandmother, but never touched his daughters. When my uncle was 16, he finally stood up to him and delivered a brutal beating. After that, my grandfather calmed down significantly. Story 36. All right, here it goes. My father was a relentlessly self-improving bakery owner from Belgium with mild narcolepsy and a flair for the dramatic. My mother was a 15-year-old French performer named Chloe. She also happened to have webbed feet. My dad was known for womanizing and drinking, and for making outrageous claims like having invented the question mark. He even accused chestnuts of being lazy. It was the kind of eccentric behavior that only those with a hint of genius or madness seemed to possess. My childhood was fairly typical, all things considered. Summers in Rangoon, luge lessons. In the spring, we made meat helmets. When I misbehaved, I was placed in a burlap sack and disciplined with reeds. Pretty standard stuff, really. At age 12, I received my first personal assistant. At 14, a Zoroastrian named Vilma performed a traditional grooming ritual on me. It's a strange thing to remember, but somehow unforgettable. Looking back, it was an unusual childhood, bizarre, colorful, and completely one of a kind. Story 37. Both of my uncles were very close and spent a lot of time together. One of them had been going through a rough period, facing legal issues and complications from diabetes, which eventually led to the amputation of his foot. A couple of summers ago, they got into a serious argument. Afterward, one uncle said he was done with everything and basically said goodbye. A month passed with no word from him, no calls, no response at the door. Eventually, my other uncle stepped forward, saying he was worried, and admitted they had a fight. My mom, along with the police, went to his home to check on him. They had to break down the door. Inside, they found him. He had been deceased for a month in 100-degree weather with no air conditioning. My grandparents chose not to investigate the cause of death, choosing instead to believe it was an accidental overdose, perhaps pain medication combined with insulin complications. However, my mom quietly looked into it and discovered he had 10 times the standard amount of pain medication in his system, medication he didn't have access to, but my surviving uncle did. Only she and I know the full truth. We've never spoken a word of it to anyone. My surviving uncle clearly carries guilt, but he's never admitted to anything.